Laura Bennett was not the kind of person who stood out in a crowd. She was quiet, polite, and always kept to herself. People in her small town often described her as nice or sweet, but no one really knew much about her beyond that. Every day, she woke up early, dressed neatly, and walked to her job at the community center where she worked as an administrative assistant. Her days were filled with answering phones, organizing files, and helping the occasional visitor find their way around. It wasn't glamorous work, but it suited Laura just fine. What most people didn't know about Laura was that beneath her calm exterior lay a secret, a skill so extraordinary that it would have shocked anyone who thought they understood her. For the past 3 years, Laura had been training in a rare martial art form taught by none other than Chuck Norris himself. This wasn't some flashy Hollywood version of karate. It was a disciplined, intense practice designed for real-world combat. The techniques were precise, powerful, and nearly impossible to master without years of dedication. And Laura? She was getting very good. Her decision to learn this martial art came from a place of pain. Years ago, before moving to the sleepy, little town, Laura had lived in a big city where life felt overwhelming. One night, while walking home alone, she had been cornered by 2 men in an alley. They hadn't stolen anything. They'd only mocked her, laughed at her fear, and left her feeling powerless. That moment stayed with her long after the bruises faded. When she stumbled upon Marcus Kane's dojo during a road trip, something inside her clicked. She signed up immediately, determined never to feel helpless again. Now, every evening after work, Laura drove to the edge of town where the old warehouse-turned-dojo stood hidden behind rows of trees. There, under Marcus's watchful eye, she trained alongside a small group of dedicated students. They practiced kicks, punches, blocks, and grapples until sweat soaked through their uniforms. Laura loved the focus it required, the way everything else faded away when she stepped onto the mat. It gave her strength, both physically and mentally. But outside the dojo, she kept her skills to herself. To everyone else, she was still just Laura, the quiet woman who smiled softly and avoided drawing attention. On this particular evening, however, things took an unexpected turn. Laura stayed late at the community center finishing up paperwork, losing track of time as she double-checked numbers for the monthly budget report. By the time she packed up and headed out, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the streets bathed in the dim glow of streetlights. As she walked home, her heels clicking against the pavement, she noticed a police cruiser idling near the curb ahead. 2 officers sat inside, chatting casually. At first, Laura thought nothing of it. Cops patrolled the area all the time, but then the car slowly rolled forward until it matched her pace. The window on the passenger side lowered and one of the officers leaned out. "Hey there," he called, his tone teasing. "Nice skirt." Laura glanced down at her outfit, a simple, black pencil skirt paired with a white blouse, and frowned slightly. She wasn't sure what to say. "Thank you," she replied hesitantly, unsure if it was meant as a compliment or something else entirely. The officer chuckled. His name badge read Jake Miller, and his partner, sitting silently behind the wheel, was Ryan Carter. Both men looked young, barely, out of their 20s, with the cocky confidence that often came with wearing a badge. Jake smirked as he leaned farther out the window. "You know, skirts like that are asking for trouble." Laura stopped walking and turned to face them fully. Her expression remained neutral, though her stomach tightened with unease. "I don't think I'm doing anything wrong," she said evenly, her voice firm despite the knot forming in her chest. Ryan finally spoke up, his grin matching Jake's. "Oh, we're not saying you're doing anything illegal, just maybe a little risky." He paused, letting the words hang in the air before adding, "For someone like you." Laura blinked, taken aback by the insinuation. Before she could respond, Jake opened the car door and stepped out. He sauntered toward her, his posture relaxed but deliberate. Ryan followed suit, circling around to stand beside his partner. Together, they formed a loose semicircle around her, effectively blocking her path. "Come on," Jake said, his smile widening. "We're just messing with you." Lighten up. Laura's jaw tightened. She hated being cornered, both literally and figuratively. Memories of that dark alley flickered briefly in her mind, but she pushed them aside. These weren't predators lurking in shadows. They were cops, sworn to protect and serve. Surely they wouldn't cross any lines. Still, her instincts screamed at her to be cautious. As if sensing her discomfort, Jake reached out suddenly and tugged at the hem of her skirt, lifting it just enough to expose a sliver of skin above her knee. "See?" he joked, glancing back at Ryan. "Not so bad, right?" Laura froze, humiliation burning hot across her cheeks. For a split second, she considered apologizing, explaining that she didn't appreciate their behavior, or even turning around and walking away. But then something inside her snapped. All those hours spent training, all the discipline she'd cultivated over the years, it surged to the surface like a tidal wave. In one fluid motion, Laura grabbed Jake's wrist, twisted it sharply and used his own momentum to spin him around. Before he could react, she swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Ryan stared, stunned, as Laura pivoted toward him. Without hesitation, she snatched the flashlight clipped to his belt, pressed it firmly against his throat, and pinned him against the patrol car. The entire exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. When it was over, Laura stood between the two officers, her breathing steady, her eyes blazing with intensity. Jake groaned as he struggled to sit up, clutching his arm. Ryan, still trapped against the car, swallowed hard, his earlier bravado completely gone. "You picked the wrong person to mess with," Laura said coolly. Her voice carried no anger, only certainty. Then, without another word, she released Ryan, straightened her skirt and walked away, leaving the two men staring after her in disbelief. Neither Jake nor Ryan moved for several moments. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" Ryan shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, man. But whatever it was, she's not messing around." And deep down, they both knew they'd made a mistake, one that might cost them more than just their pride. Jake Miller and Ryan Carter stood there, still reeling from what had just happened. The cool night air did little to calm their racing hearts or the embarrassment that burned in their cheeks. Laura was already gone, her figure disappearing into the distance as she walked with steady, confident strides. Neither of them could believe it. How had this quiet, unassuming woman managed to take them down so easily? They were cops trained to handle dangerous situations, yet they'd been completely outmatched. Did that really just happen? Jake finally muttered, rubbing his sore wrist where Laura had twisted it. His voice was shaky, a mix of disbelief and frustration. Ryan nodded slowly, leaning against the patrol car for support. "Yeah, it did," he said, his tone quieter than usual, "and we deserved every bit of it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They stared at the empty street, replaying the scene in their minds. One second they were joking around, thinking they were untouchable, and the next they were flat on the ground, or pinned against their own car. It wasn't just the physical pain that stung. It was the realization that they'd underestimated Laura so completely. She hadn't shouted or argued when they teased her. Instead, she'd acted decisively, almost effortlessly, leaving them humiliated and questioning everything they thought they knew about her. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "Who is she anyway? I mean, seriously, what kind of person can do whatever that was?" Ryan shook his head again, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know, but something tells me we need to find out." Back at the police station, the two officers tried to brush off the incident as a fluke. They didn't want anyone else to know what had happened. It was too embarrassing. But secrets have a way of slipping out, especially in a small town like theirs. As they sat at their desks filling out routine paperwork, another officer overheard their hushed conversation. "Hey, what's going on with you two?" asked Sergeant Bill Harper, a grizzled veteran with decades of experience under his belt. He was known for his no-nonsense attitude and sharp instincts. When he noticed Jake wincing while writing and Ryan avoiding eye contact, he immediately sensed something was off. "Nothing, Sarge," Jake replied quickly, trying to sound casual. "Just a rough night." Harper raised an eyebrow. clearly unconvinced. A rough night? You've been here 10 minutes and both of you look like you got your egos handed to you. Spill it. Reluctantly, Jake and Ryan explained what had happened. At first, Harper listened silently, his expression unreadable. But as they described Laura's movements and how she'd disarmed them in seconds, his curiosity grew. Wait a minute, Harper interrupted, leaning forward. You're telling me this woman, a civilian, took both of you down without breaking a sweat? Ryan nodded, looking sheepish. Yeah, Sarge. It was impressive and terrifying. Harper leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Impressive. Doesn't even begin to cover it. Sounds like she knows her stuff. Did either of you catch her name? Laura Bennett, Jake mumbled. She works at the community center. The mention of the name made Harper pause. He tapped his fingers on the desk, deep in thought. Laura Bennett, huh? That explains a lot. What do you mean? Ryan asked, confused. Harper stood up and grabbed his jacket. Come on, boys. We're going for a ride. As they drove through the quiet streets, Harper filled them in on what he knew. Over the past few months, there had been rumors circulating about self-defense workshops being held at the community center. Nothing official, just whispers among residents who claimed they'd learned some incredible skills. Harper had dismissed it at first, assuming it was just hype. But now, connecting the dots, he realized those workshops might have something to do with Laura. They arrived at the community center just as the lights were turning off. A lone figure stepped out of the building, locking the door behind her. It was Laura. She stopped when she saw the patrol car pull up, her expression guarded but not surprised. Evening, Ms. Bennett, Harper said as he approached her. Mind if we talk for a minute? Laura hesitated, then nodded. Sure. What's this about? Harper gestured to Jake and Ryan, who were standing awkwardly behind him. These two gentlemen wanted to apologize for their behavior earlier tonight. They also wanted to ask you a few questions. Laura glanced at Jake and Ryan, her gaze steady. Apology accepted. Now, what do you want to know? Jake cleared his throat nervously. We were wondering how you learned to fight like that. I mean, no offense, but it's not exactly something you see every day. Laura crossed her arms, considering her response. Let's just say I've had good teachers. Beyond that, it's none of your business. Her tone was polite but firm, leaving no room for argument. Harper, however, wasn't ready to let the matter drop. Fair enough, he said. But if you're teaching people self-defense, maybe you should consider reaching out to us. We could use someone with your skills to help train our officers. Laura raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. You think I'd be interested in working with the police after what happened tonight? Harper held up his hands in surrender. Point taken. But hear me out. If you're willing, we'd like to learn more about what you do, not just for ourselves, but for the community. Maybe there's a way we can work together. Laura studied him for a long moment, weighing his words. Finally, she sighed. Fine. Come to the dojo tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock. If you're serious, you'll show up. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the three men standing in stunned silence. The next evening, Jake, Ryan, and Harper arrived at the address Laura had given them. An old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The outside was unassuming, its faded paint and rusted metal doors giving no hint of what lay inside. But as they stepped through the entrance, they were greeted by the sound of rhythmic punches and kicks echoing off the walls. Inside, the space had been transformed into a fully equipped dojo. Mats covered the floor, and posters of martial arts legends lined the walls. Dozens of students moved in synchronized patterns, their movements precise and powerful. At the front of the room stood Marcus Kane, a tall man with salt and pepper, hair and a commanding presence. Beside him was Laura, demonstrating a complex series of techniques. When the session ended, Marcus approached the visitors, his expression curious but welcoming. Can I help you, gentlemen? Harper stepped forward, introducing himself and explaining why they were there. Marcus listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Harper finished, Marcus turned to Laura, raising an eyebrow. Well, Laura? What Do you think? Laura hesitated, glancing at Jake and Ryan. For a moment it seemed like she might refuse, but then she nodded. All right. If they're willing to put in the work, they can stay, but only if they follow the rules. Marcus grinned, clapping his hands together. Good, let's get started. Over the next hour, Jake and Ryan watched in awe as Laura and Marcus led the class through drills and sparring exercises. The level of skill on display was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Even Harper, who prided himself on his own combat training, looked impressed. At one point, Marcus called Jake and Ryan to the mat. Let's see what you've got, he said, motioning for them to spar with some of the students. Though hesitant at first, they soon found themselves matched against opponents far stronger and faster than they expected. By the end of the session, both men were exhausted and humbled. As they bowed to their partners, Laura approached them, her expression softer than before. You did okay, she said simply. But there's still a lot to learn. If you're serious about improving, come back tomorrow. Jake and Ryan exchanged a glance, then nodded. We will, Jake promised. And thanks for everything. Laura gave them a small smile before turning away, disappearing into the crowd of students. For the first time since meeting her, Jake and Ryan felt a glimmer of hope, not just for themselves, but for the possibility of redemption. The days that followed Jake and Ryan's first visit to the dojo were a whirlwind of emotions for both men. They had expected to feel ashamed or defensive after their encounter with Laura, but instead, they found themselves intrigued and, oddly, inspired. The experience at the dojo wasn't just about learning how to fight. It was about understanding discipline, respect, and humility in ways they'd never considered before. For two young officers who had spent much of their careers relying on authority rather than skill, this new perspective was eye-opening. Each evening after their shift ended, Jake and Ryan returned to the warehouse-turned-dojo. At first, they hesitated, unsure if they truly belonged there. But Marcus Kane, the instructor, made it clear from the start that everyone was welcome, as long as they came with an open mind and a willingness to learn. This isn't about being tough, he told them during one session. It's about becoming better, not just as fighters, but as people. Laura didn't say much to them during those early days. She focused on teaching her students, moving gracefully across the mat as she demonstrated techniques and corrected stances. Occasionally, though, she would glance at Jake and Ryan, her expression unreadable. It was hard to tell whether she still resented them or if she was simply observing their progress. Either way, her presence loomed large in the room, a constant reminder of the night that had changed everything. As the weeks went by, Jake and Ryan began to notice subtle changes in themselves. Their movements became sharper, more controlled. They learned to anticipate their opponent's actions instead of reacting impulsively. Even outside the dojo, they found themselves carrying themselves differently, standing taller, speaking more, thoughtfully, and paying closer attention to the people around them. It wasn't just physical strength they were gaining. It was confidence rooted in self-awareness. Despite these improvements, there were moments when frustration bubbled to the surface. One evening, during a particularly grueling sparring session, Ryan found himself matched against a student half his size. No matter what he tried, he couldn't land a single blow without being countered effortlessly. Frustrated, he threw a wild punch, a mistake that earned him a swift takedown. "You're thinking too much," Laura said as she helped him up. Her voice was calm but firm. "Stop trying to overpower your opponent. Focus on balance and timing." Ryan sighed, brushing sweat from his brow. "Easier said than done." Laura crossed her arms, studying him. "You've been trained to rely on force because of your job. That works sometimes, but not always. Martial arts isn't about brute strength. It's about strategy. If you want to improve, you need to let go of your ego." Her words hit home. Ryan nodded slowly, taking a deep breath before stepping back onto the mat. Jake watched the exchange silently, recognizing the same lesson applied to him. Both men realized that part of their problem stemmed from arrogance, the belief that their badges and uniforms automatically commanded respect. Here in the dojo, titles meant nothing. Everyone started as equals, and success depended solely on effort and attitude. Harper, meanwhile, continued to attend sessions alongside his subordinates. Unlike Jake and Ryan, he approached the training with quiet determination, often staying late to practice forms or ask Marcus questions about technique. His dedication impressed even Laura, who rarely offered praise outright. One night, after most of the students had left, Harper approached her while she was rolling up mats. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting us stay. I know we don't deserve it." Laura paused, meeting his gaze. "You're here now, that's what matters." Harper nodded, sensing she wasn't one for lengthy conversations. Still, he pressed on. "I've been doing this job for a long time, and I'll admit, I've made mistakes. Maybe not like those two." He gestured toward Jake and Ryan, who were chatting near the door. "But mistakes all the same. Coming here, it's reminded me why I became a cop in the first place. To protect people, not bully them." Laura studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Good. Don't forget it." Outside the dojo, word of Jake and Ryan's transformation began to spread. Other officers noticed the change in their demeanor, how they carried themselves. With more poise, listened more attentively, and handled conflicts with greater patience. Some teased them about going soft, but others were curious. When Harper mentioned the dojo during a team meeting, several officers expressed interest in joining. Within weeks, a handful of newcomers started showing up for evening sessions, eager to see what all the fuss was about. Marcus welcomed them warmly, explaining the philosophy behind the martial art they practiced. "This isn't about winning fights," he emphasized. "It's about building character. Every kick, every punch, it's a reflection of who you are. Respect yourself and you'll earn the respect of others." Laura remained mostly silent during these introductions, preferring to let Marcus handle the explanations. But her presence alone spoke volumes. Students looked up to her, not just for her incredible skill, but for her quiet strength and unwavering focus. She led by example, demonstrating techniques with precision and encouraging others to push past their limits. For Jake and Ryan, having Laura as a teacher added another layer of complexity to their journey. On one hand, they admired her talent and dedication. On the other, they couldn't shake the memory of how they'd treated her that fateful night. Though she never brought it up directly, they sensed she hadn't fully forgiven them, and maybe never would. But that didn't stop them from trying to prove themselves. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, Jake approached Laura as she packed up her gear. "Hey," he said hesitantly, "can I talk to you for a sec?" Laura glanced at him, then nodded. "Sure." Jake took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to say sorry again. Not just for what happened before, but for doubting you. I didn't think someone like you could handle herself the way you did. Turns out I was wrong." Laura listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. When he finished, she gave a slight shrug. "Apology accepted, but remember, it's not about me. It's about how you treat everyone else. Respect isn't something you give only when you're forced to. It's something you offer freely." Jake nodded, feeling a mix of relief and resolve. "Got it. Thanks." As he walked away, Laura watched him go, a faint smile playing on her lips. She knew forgiveness wasn't something that could be rushed, but she also recognized genuine effort when she saw it. And for now, that was enough. Back at the police station, the ripple effects of the dojo training became impossible to ignore. Officers who attended sessions reported feeling more confident and composed on duty. Complaints from civilians dropped, significantly, replaced by positive feedback about improved interactions and professionalism. Even Sergeant Harper noticed a shift in morale among his team. The dojo had become more than just a place to learn martial arts. It was a catalyst for growth, both individually and collectively. Still, challenges remained. Old habits died hard, and not everyone embraced the changes willingly. Some officers dismissed the dojo as a passing trend, while others resisted the idea of learning from civilians. But Harper refused to let negativity derail the progress they'd made. He reminded his team that true leadership meant leading by example, And that included admitting when you were wrong. By the time autumn rolled around, the dojo had become a cornerstone of the community. Residents who once viewed the police department with suspicion now saw glimpses of hope. Dojo members volunteered at local events, organized fundraisers, and worked together to address issues facing the town. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. Through it all, Laura remained a steady presence. Quiet, unassuming, yet undeniably powerful. She never sought recognition or praise, content to let her actions speak for themselves. For Jake and Ryan, she represented not just a teacher, but a symbol of redemption. They knew they still had a long way to go, but with each step forward, they felt closer to earning the respect they'd once taken for granted. And so, the journey continued, not just for them, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by the unlikely alliance between cops and a martial artist named Laura Bennett. As the weeks turned into months, the dojo became more than just a training ground for Jake, Ryan, and their fellow officers. It transformed into a place where walls came down, both literally and figuratively. The physical barriers between law enforcement and civilians began to dissolve, replaced by shared experiences and mutual respect. For Jake and Ryan, this shift was especially profound. They had entered the dojo humiliated and defensive, but they were slowly finding a new sense of purpose. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Marcus gathered everyone in the center of the mat. He rarely spoke about anything other than technique or discipline, so when he cleared his throat and asked for attention, the room fell silent. "I've been watching all of you grow," Marcus began, his deep voice carrying across the space. "Some of you started here as strangers, unsure of yourselves or each other, but now, look around. You're working together, supporting one another, and learning what it means to truly respect someone, not because of their job or title, but because of who they are." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And earning it takes time, effort, and humility. That's why we're here, to remind ourselves that no matter who we are outside these walls, inside we're all equals." Jake glanced at Ryan, who gave him a small nod. Both men understood the weight of Marcus's words. They had come to the dojo expecting to learn how to fight better, but instead, they were discovering lessons far deeper than punches and kicks. Every movement on the mat taught them patience. Every sparring match forced them to confront their weaknesses. And every interaction with Laura and the other students reminded them of the importance of treating others with dignity. After Marcus dismissed the class, Jake lingered behind, helping roll up mats alongside Harper and a few others. Ryan joined him moments later, wiping sweat from his face with a towel. Neither said much, they didn't need to. The quiet camaraderie they'd developed over the past few months spoke volumes. Laura walked past them, heading toward the storage closet where spare gear was kept. Jake hesitated for a moment before calling out softly, "Hey, Laura." She stopped and turned, her expression neutral. "Yeah? Do you ever regret letting us stay?" Jake asked, his tone cautious. "I mean, after everything that happened." Laura studied him for a moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. Then she shook her head. "No, everyone deserves a chance to change, even cops." Her words weren't harsh, but they carried a weight that made Jake swallow hard. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth in what she said. "Thanks," he murmured, "for giving us that chance." Laura gave him a slight smile, one of the first genuine smiles she'd shown either of them, and continued on her way. Ryan watched her go, then nudged Jake with his elbow. "You think she'll ever fully trust us?" Jake shrugged, tucking the rolled-up mat under his arm. "Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, it's not really about her trusting us. It's about us proving we're worth trusting." Ryan nodded, considering that. Fair point. Outside the dojo, the changes in Jake and Ryan's behavior were becoming impossible to ignore. Their colleagues noticed the difference immediately, not just in how they handled themselves physically, but in how they interacted with people. Where once they might have relied on authority to resolve conflicts, they now approached situations with calmness and empathy. Complaints from civilians dropped sharply, replaced by positive feedback about their improved communication skills and willingness to listen. Even Harper was impressed. One morning, as the team gathered for briefing, he addressed the group. "I've seen some real progress lately," he said, his gravelly voice tinged with pride. "Not just from our rookies," he shot Jake and Ryan a pointed look, "but from all of you. Keep it up. This is what being a cop is supposed to be about, serving the community, not ruling over it." The comment earned a round of nods and murmurs of agreement. For many of the officers, the dojo had become a reminder of why they'd chosen this line of work in the first place. It wasn't about power or control. It was about making a difference. But old habits die hard, and not everyone embraced the changes willingly. A few veteran officers grumbled about the softening of the department, claiming that too much focus on touchy-feely stuff would weaken their effectiveness. Others simply resisted the idea of learning from civilians, viewing it as beneath them. Despite these challenges, Harper refused to let negativity derail the progress they'd made. "You want to sit on the sidelines and complain?" he snapped during one heated argument. "Fine. But don't expect anyone else to follow your lead. If you're not willing to adapt and grow, maybe this isn't the right place for you." His words silenced the dissenters, at least temporarily. Slowly but surely, even the skeptics began to see the value of the dojo. Some attended sessions reluctantly at first, only to find themselves hooked by the discipline and camaraderie. Others remained resistant, but their numbers dwindled as the culture within the department shifted. Meanwhile, Laura continued to balance her life between the dojo and her quiet routine at the community center. She rarely spoke about her personal journey, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. Still, there were moments when her guard slipped, revealing glimpses of the pain and resilience that had shaped her. One evening, after most of the students had left, Harper approached her while she was tidying up. "Mind if I ask you something?" he said, leaning against the wall. Laura glanced at him, then shrugged. "Go ahead." "What made you start training in the first place?" Harper asked. "If you don't mind me asking." Laura hesitated, her hands pausing mid-motion. For a moment, he thought she might brush him off. Instead, she sighed softly and sat down on a nearby bench. "It's not a secret," she said finally. "Years ago, I lived in a big city. One night I was walking home alone when two guys cornered me in an alley. They didn't take anything, they just laughed at me, mocked me for being scared. After that, I promised myself I'd never feel powerless again." Harper listened silently, his expression somber. "That must have been tough." "It was," Laura admitted. "But it taught me something important. Fear doesn't go away unless you face it. Martial arts gave me a way to do that. It's not about fighting back. It's about knowing you can handle whatever comes your way." Harper nodded, understanding the depth of what she was saying. "And now you teach others to do the same." "Exactly," Laura replied, standing up. "Because everyone deserves to feel strong. Even cops." Her last remark caught Harper off guard, and he chuckled despite himself. "Well, thanks for reminding us of that." As autumn deepened, the bond between the dojo members grew stronger. Training sessions often spilled into casual conversations afterward, with students sharing stories about their lives and struggles. Jake and Ryan found themselves opening up more than they ever expected, talking about the pressures of their job and the mistakes they'd made along the way. To their surprise, the civilians in the group listened without judgment, offering advice and encouragement instead of criticism. One chilly evening, as the group gathered around a bonfire outside the dojo, Marcus raised a toast. "To growth," he said, holding up a bottle of water. "Not just in martial arts, but in life. Here's to becoming better versions of ourselves." Everyone echoed the sentiment, clinking bottles and sharing laughter. For Jake and Ryan, the moment felt like a turning point. They realized they weren't just learning how to fight. They were learning how to live with integrity, humility, and purpose. And through it all, Laura remained a steady presence, guiding them with quiet strength. She may not have sought recognition, but her impact was undeniable. In her own way, she had changed not just Jake and Ryan, but an entire community. Winter arrived quietly in the small town, wrapping everything in a soft blanket of frost. The trees stood bare, their branches reaching toward the pale gray sky, and the streets were quieter than usual, as people stayed indoors to avoid the biting cold. But inside the dojo, warmth radiated, not from heaters, but from the energy of its members. The training sessions continued without pause, a steady rhythm that had become a cornerstone of everyone's lives. For Jake and Ryan, the changes they'd undergone over the past months were undeniable. They no longer walked into the dojo with the nervousness or defensiveness they'd shown at first. Instead, they moved with confidence, their bodies stronger and more agile, their minds sharper and more focused. What surprised them most, however, was how much their perspective on life had shifted. Before, they had thought being a cop meant holding authority over others. Now they understood it meant serving and protecting with humility and respect. 1. Evening after a particularly grueling session, Marcus called everyone together for a final word before dismissing them. "You've all come so far," he said, his voice warm with pride. "But remember, martial arts isn't something you master overnight. It's a lifelong journey. And the same goes for the lessons we learn here about respect, discipline, and kindness." As the students nodded in agreement, Laura stepped forward. She rarely spoke during these moments, but tonight, she seemed to have something on her mind. "I want to thank all of you," she began, her voice soft but steady. "When I first started teaching, I wasn't sure if anyone would stick around, but seeing how hard you've worked and how much you've grown makes me proud." Her words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. For Jake and Ryan, they carried extra weight. They knew Laura didn't offer praise lightly, and hearing her acknowledge their efforts meant more than any medal or promotion ever could. After the session ended, Harper lingered behind, chatting with Marcus while Jake and Ryan helped clean up. As they stacked mats and put away gear, Laura approached them again. This time there was no hesitation in her expression, only calm certainty. "I've been thinking," she said, looking between them. "You two have improved a lot, not just your skills, but your attitude. I think it's time you tested yourselves." Jake blinked, caught off guard. "Tested? Like a belt exam?" Laura shook her head. "Not exactly. Martial arts isn't just about belts or titles. It's about proving to yourself that you're ready to take responsibility for your actions, for your decisions, and for the people around you. So tomorrow night, instead of regular training, you'll face a challenge, don't worry. It's nothing dangerous, just something to push you out of your comfort zone." Ryan exchanged a glance with Jake, both men feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. "We're ready," Ryan said finally, speaking for both of them. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it." Laura gave them a small smile. "Good. See you tomorrow." The next evening, Jake and Ryan arrived at the dojo earlier than usual, their stomachs churning with anticipation. They weren't sure what kind of challenge Laura had planned, but they trusted her enough to know it wouldn't be easy. When they stepped inside, they found the space transformed. The mats had been cleared away, leaving an open area in the center of the room. Around the edges, chairs had been set up for the other students, who were already gathering to watch. Marcus stood near the front, his arms crossed as he surveyed the setup. "This is going to be interesting," he muttered under his breath, though his tone suggested he approved. Laura appeared moments later carrying a large wooden box. She placed it carefully in the middle of the floor and opened it, revealing several items inside: blindfolds, padded gloves, and a series of obstacles, made from foam blocks and ropes. The sight only deepened Jake and Ryan's confusion. "What's all this?" Jake asked, gesturing to the equipment. Laura smiled faintly. "Your challenge. You'll work together to navigate the course while wearing blindfolds. One of you will guide the other using only your voice, then you'll switch roles. The goal isn't speed, it's trust. Can you rely on each other completely even when you can't see?" Jake and Ryan exchanged a glance, their earlier nerves giving way to determination. "Got it," Ryan said firmly. Let's do this. The challenge proved harder than either of them expected. Navigating the obstacles while blindfolded required intense focus, and communicating effectively without visual cues was surprisingly difficult. At one point, Jake stumbled over a rope and nearly knocked over a foam block, causing the audience to gasp. But Ryan's steady voice guided him back on track, and they pressed on. When they finally completed the course, both men were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with exertion. Despite the difficulty, they felt a surge of accomplishment and gratitude. Through the exercise, they'd learned not just to trust each other, but also to confront their own fears of vulnerability. You did well, Laura said afterward, her tone approving. Remember, trust isn't something you build overnight. It takes practice, patience, and honesty. Jake nodded, still catching his breath. Thanks, Laura. We couldn't have done it without you or everyone else here. The other students clapped and cheered, their applause filling the room with warmth. For Jake and Ryan, the moment felt like a milestone, a testament to how far they'd come since that fateful night months ago. As winter gave way to spring, the bond between the dojo members grew even stronger. Training sessions became less about individual improvement and more about supporting one another. Students shared meals after class, organized community events, and worked together to address issues facing the town. The dojo had become more than just a place to learn martial arts. It was a family. For Jake and Ryan, the transformation extended beyond the mat. On duty, they handled situations with a level of empathy and professionalism that earned widespread praise. Civilians who once viewed them with suspicion now greeted them warmly, knowing they could count on fair treatment. Even the skeptics within the police department had softened, recognizing the positive impact the dojo had brought to the community. One sunny afternoon, as the cherry blossoms bloomed outside, Harper gathered the team for a special announcement. "I'm retiring," he said simply, his voice tinged with emotion. "It's been a long career, and I couldn't be prouder of where we are today. But it's time for someone else to take the reins." The news hit everyone hard, especially Jake and Ryan, who had come to see Harper as a mentor. After a brief silence, Jake spoke up. "Who's taking over, Sarge?" Harper smiled, glancing at the two young officers. "That's up to you guys. Leadership isn't about rank, it's about action. If you keep doing what you're doing, you won't need me to tell you what to do." His words resonated deeply with the entire team. As Harper left the station for the last time, he stopped by the dojo to say goodbye. Marcus, Laura, and the students gathered to honor him, presenting him with a framed photo of the group taken during one of their bonfire nights. "Thank you," Harper said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You've all taught me more than I could have hoped for." In the months that followed, the dojo continued to thrive. New students joined, drawn by stories of its impact on the community. Jake and Ryan took on leadership roles, mentoring newcomers, and helping organize outreach programs. Laura remained a constant presence, guiding everyone with quiet strength and unwavering dedication. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Laura stood at the edge of the mat, watching her students train. Jake and Ryan sparred nearby, their movements fluid and precise. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because of what she'd achieved, but because of what they had built together. Martial arts had always been about more than fighting for Laura. It was about resilience, respect, and connection, and in this small town, those values had taken root, spreading far beyond the walls of the dojo. As the session ended and the students bowed to one another, Laura allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had started this journey seeking strength for herself, but along the way she had given others the tools to find their own. That, she realized, was the true power of martial arts, and the reason she kept coming back. The future was uncertain, as it always was. But for now, in this moment, everything felt right.